Okay, here we go. Welcome back to another book stream. This beautiful night, we are on chapter 29 called Battle to the Last. In the last chapter, it was just kind of traveling chapter where Ion and Merlin were traveling to the land of the dwarves. And they jumped over this angry line of dwarves and are headed to the mountain where Merlin is supposed to meet Valdirg. So, let's read. Chapter 29, Battle to the Last. Like a landslide on high, the rumbling rolled out of the sky, overwhelming Ion and myself, shaking the charred ground beneath us. An outcropping of rock on the summit of the pyramid-shaped hill broke loose, clattering down the slope. Ion reared back, arresting his gallop as we both turned toward the source of the sound. Valdirg, wings outstretched, plunged at us with incredible speed. Caught by the rays of the setting sun, he looked at first like a clot of crimson against the smoky sky, though soon armored scales of green and orange showed along his tail and wings. Then, as he banked to one side, his terrible claws flashed brightly. Closer he came, and closer, until we could see the smoldering yellow of his eyes. Writhing columns of smoke poured from his flared nostrils. Beneath his nose, the scales had been so blackened that he seemed to wear a thick mustache. Immense slabs of charcoal clung to the rims of his orange ears, flaking off every time his ears twisted. Several of his claws sported black humps resembling knuckles. More lumps of charcoal, I thought at first, until the truth struck me like a hammer. They were skulls, burned in the fire of his wrath, worn like so many decorative rings. As if entranced, we did not move as the dragon descended. Waves of rumbling rolled over us. If the sky itself had ripped apart, I thought, the noise couldn't have been louder. I was wrong. Soaring straight at us, the dragon opened his cavernous mouth. Row upon row of dagger-like teeth glinted in the reddish light. The gargantuan chest rippled and contracted, releasing an explosive roar so loud that I almost toppled from Ion's back. The roar broke our trance. Fortunate indeed, for along with it came an enormous, twisting tongue of flame. Ion whinnied and bolted from the spot. The fire blasted the ground just behind us, splitting the very rocks with its heat. While flames singed my back and Ion's flank, we galloped away. "Quick!" I cried. "Behind the hill!" The stallion drove for the pyramidal hill, even as another deafening roar struck our ears. Ion barely had time to dodge behind a boulder, shaped like an immense fist, before more licks of flames flooded over us. As we cowered behind the wall of stone, blazing fingers curled over the top and around the sides, scorching all they touched. Only the boulder's thickness saved us from being reduced to heaps of ash. The flames had hardly dissipated when I cautiously lifted my head to check the dragon's whereabouts. He had just landed. He drew his wings to his back and slid his titanic form, nearly as huge as the hill itself, across the ground. Strangely, he was turning, not toward us, but to the side. In a flash, I understood why. I slapped Ion's neck, and he charged for the rim of the hill. At the same instant, the dragon's massive tail uncoiled. Like a hideous whip, its barbed tips waving, the tail sliced through the air. It slammed into the fist-shaped boulder, sending chunks of stone in all directions. Shards rained down on us as we rounded the hill's edge just in time. "Grandson of Tuatha," the dragon's voice, deeper than thunder, exploded against the slope. "You murdered my children!" As Ion continued to run behind the hill, I bent forward. "Wait! I must answer him!" Although he slowed to a trot, the stallion gave a loud neigh, shaking his head vigorously. "I must, Ion." Again, he protested. Sadly, I stroked his neck. "You're right. It's madness for us both to go back. Here, I'll dismount, so at least you can run to safety." Before I could lift my leg, Ion reared back, forcing me to grab his mane more tightly. He whirled around, turned his muzzle toward me, and scanned me with a dark eye. With a loud snort, he trotted back to the edge of the hill. From astride his back, I peered cautiously around the charred rocks. Drawing a deep breath, I called as loud as I could to Valdirg. Your rage burns deep, great dragon, but you must hear me. I did not kill your offspring. I waited for the wave of rumbling to cease. It was another man who serves Rita Gower, and he brings the Krelix, the magic eater, back to our land. His name is... A torrent of flames erupted, cutting me off and driving me back behind the rocks. You dare to deny your crime? Valdir's voice shook the air as his tail smashed against the ground. Even your evil grandfather did not try to hide from his deeds. You do not deserve to bear the title of wizard. The emptiness in my chest almost throbbed. Grimly, I led Ion back to the hill's edge. You speak truly. I don't deserve it. But I did not murder your young. The dragon's yellow eyes flashed. Smoke billowed from his nostrils. And I did not come to hear you prattle about Krelixes and Rita Gower. Ages ago I fought the last of all the Krelixes, a battle to the death. His death, not mine. Now I shall do the same to you, and you shall die 9 deaths, one for each of my slain children. I tell you, I didn't kill them. Liar! They must be avenged. With that, another roar rocked the smoky skies, the charred ground, and all in between. The mammoth tail lifted and swept toward me. Ion needed no command to break into a run. The tail slammed full force into the side of the hill, sending up a shower of broken rocks. I turned just in time to see an enormous slab, heavy enough to crush a dozen people, topple over onto the midsection of the tail. It struck the green scales and bounced harmlessly away. Ion galloped with all his strength, trying to put us as much distance as possible between ourselves and Valdirg. As we neared the far side of the hill, I glanced to the rear just as the massive head came into view. The dragon's eyes, as bright as suns in the waning light, glared at me. More flames shot out. Fire nipped at Ion's hooves as we rounded the bend. Using the hill itself as our shield, we avoided one assault after another. Back and forth Ion ran, his legs churning, his ears attuned to any sound. For although we could not see our attacker behind the hill, we could still hear him maneuvering, roaring, or slapping his huge tail against the rocks. If his vast bulk slid one way, we dashed the other. We paused, breathless, whenever we could no longer hear him, then galloped off again as soon as he stirred. Deep into the night the pursuit continued. Once Valdir tried to take flight, hoping to surprise us in the darkness, but even then the noise of his approach gave him away. Yet I knew that, with enough time, he would surely outlast us. Ion was bound to make a mistake, to stumble or misread the sounds, and one mistake was all the dragon needed. Or was he merely toying with us, prolonging his moment of vengeance? As dawn's first rays caressed the slope, dousing the rocks with gold, I could see that Ion was tiring. Globules of sweat clung to his lips and mane, his shoulder muscles quivered. He ran laboriously, hardly lifting his hooves. If only I could do something more than cling to the back of this brave stallion. But what? The prophecy had forecast a terrible battle, fought to the last. Yet what kind of battle was this? It was merely a pursuit, with a certain outcome. For a long moment, as the sun lifted over the horizon, Valdir did not move. Then, suddenly, he started sliding over the rocks, crushing them beneath his weight. Immediately, Ion bounded in the opposite direction. He rounded the corner at a gallop, then halted so fast that I rammed into his uplifted neck and nearly flew over his head. We were face to face with Valdir. The sound we must have heard came from those loose rocks tumbling down the slope. Ion reared back, kicking wildly, but at the same moment the monstrous tail lashed out. The barbs coiled swiftly around my chest, crushing my ribs, then carried me into the air. In an instant, I hung suspended before Valdir's snout. A blast of hot air scorched me as he gave a disgusted grunt. His voice as immense as his open jaws, he demanded, "Why do you not fight me, young wizard? Why do you only flee?" Barely able to breathe, let alone speak, I rasped, "I have no powers." "You have powers enough to murder hatchlings still in their eggs!" The yellow eyes blazed. "Well, grandson of Tuatha, you shall flee no more." "You must believe me," I protested. "I didn't do it." Shall I begin by biting off one limb at a time? His purple lips parted as he wrenched a skull off one of his upraised claws. His jaws compressed, crushing the skull completely. No, I have a better idea. I shall roast you first. The rumbling gathered, swelling deep within his chest. It grew steadily louder, while flames started licking his nostrils. At the same time, the tail's grip on me tightened. My lungs couldn't breathe, my heart couldn't beat. The jaws opened wide as an avalanche of fire rushed toward me. All at once, Valdir's ears pricked, and he cocked his head slightly. The flames shot past, searing my boots, but nothing more. Valdir released a sudden cry of surprise, and his tail released its hold. I thudded to the ground. Ion raced to my side, and I gasped for air. Wrapping one arm around the stallion's neck, I struggled to rise, and to see what had distracted the dragon. Approaching us on the charred terrain, half hobbling and half flying, came a truly strange creature. At first, all I could see was an ungainly mass, as ragged as a storm-slashed sapling. Then I glimpsed a flash of iridescent purple, a crumpled fold of leathery skin, a pair of bony shoulders, and atop the head supported by a thin, gangly neck, a pair of ears, one of which thrust out to the side like a misplaced horn. The baby dragon! She had survived. In a flash, her enormous father spun around, nearly swatting Ion and me with the bony tip of his wing. He lumbered over to the hatchling, stopping just short of her. His belly rumbled with a steady, soft drone, almost like a purr of an oversized cat, as he placed his snout upon the ground. Cautiously at first, then whimpering excitedly, the baby dragon allowed his warm breath to blow across her scales. For a long moment they looked at each other, the yellow glow of his eyes melting into the orange glow of hers. Finally, he unfurled his massive wings so that she might crawl into it. Folding its edges around her like a blanket, Valdir drew his baby near. She gave a contented squeak and huddled closer. Craning his neck, the dragon lifted his colossal head. To the sky rose a sound unlike any other sound heard in Finkyra for ages upon ages, since the birth of Wings of Fire himself. It was a mixture of deep rumbling and high, swirling, ringing notes that flew skyward with the grace of arrows. It was a complex melody, a magical tapestry woven with the lore of generations of dragons. It was, more than anything else, a song of celebration. Ion and I listened, transfixed, as Valdir's song continued for an hour or more. The hatchling, curled tightly inside her father's wing, lifted her own snout from time to time. Her ear, as plucky as ever, stretched out to the side. She seemed to be listening to the song as carefully as ourselves, but with native understanding far beyond our own. In time, the great dragon lowered his head. Moving with the power of a huge wave surging over the sea, his neck swung toward me. As soon as his gaze met my own, the spell of his song disappeared. Fear raced through me. He was coming after me again. I leaped on Ion's back, grasping his mane, ready to ride once more. Just then, the baby dragon squealed. The shrill cry arrested me, as it did her father. His orange ears swiveled, his lips curled in puzzlement. She squealed again, this time flapping her little wings frantically. He rumbled, then quieted as she made several sharp chirping sounds. At length, Valdir's yellow eyes turned back to me. It seems, young wizard, that some of what you told me was true. A dark cloud of smoke rose from his nostrils. You are not the man who murdered my children. Ion tossed his head, nickering with relief. I gave the side of his neck a pat. Yet some of what you said was false, that you have no powers. My daughter here says otherwise. He glanced at her with obvious affection. She says you saved her by your magic. I shook my head. Not with my magic. With my herbs. That's all. It's different. Not so different as you think. His huge tail lifted and wrapped around itself, forming a knot of orange and green scales that flashed in sunlight. For whatever that magic is called, it has given me back my child. Okay. So, thanks to a little baby dragon, Merlin survives because he saved her, so that's so good. But tomorrow we will read chapter 30 called When Elements Merge. So I hope you join me then and have a wonderful night. Bye.